having spoken to teachers all over the world, everyone cares about the kids. Like everyone in teaching cares about the kids, and everyone in teaching agrees that they just want to do the best for them. So it's very easy to get teachers on the same page. You know, you just need to say, what do you value in education? Oh, our kids. Everyone will agree with that. And I think it's a good point. Like, and if I was, consulting a school principal, I'd be like, right, you need a plan for improvement because nothing will improve by itself. And what your plan needs to set as a vision or a mission is what's best for our kids in our school.
Welcome everybody to Will Talks, and today we are with Nate Reinertsen from the OECD. Nate, we're so happy that you're here today, and we are really going to unbundle and unpack everything we can in the time that we have about schools and how schools can improve using data. Tell me a little bit more about yourself. Where did you come from? Where did you study?
Sure. So I'm from Western Australia. As I say, I have lived most of my life in Perth, which is the capital city, but I actually grew up in the country, and I spent a bunch of my time teaching out there as well. I started my professional career as a high school English teacher, and I taught in some government schools, and I taught in a private school. And when I was at the private school, they put me in charge of the English department, which might have been a mistake, or it might not have been. And this school had 5 campuses, right? So they had the metro campus in Perth, and then there was 4 country campuses. And in the country campuses, the populations of the towns were really small, and this was a private school, so the school populations were even smaller. So we had like one campus with like 15 students from year 3 to 12. So we had missing year groups, and we had a lot of collapsed classes. And because I was in charge, I was expected to set the standard for the whole system, right? And my teacher in one of the campuses was a chemistry teacher teaching English and knew nothing about it. And I had to sort of work with them and the other teachers to try and implement like a common standard. And so I realized I didn't know enough. And, a lot of people think that English teachers don't like data and don't like numbers. And I got to admit, like, I never, ever thought I was good at maths. Like, I never thought I had any self-efficacy in maths at all. But I knew that I needed to learn about assessment. So I went back to uni and, signed up for a course in Roche measurement theory, which is it's debatable about whether it's an item response theory or whether it's its own thing. And it's a hotly debated nerd debate. But I discovered that actually I'm good at maths and I understand applications of maths when it comes to education. Mm-hmm. And it really opened my eyes about the fact that one of the things that makes education work and effective is knowing where a student is and then going away and figuring out how to help them take the next step. You're looking short term, but if you don't know where they are, if you just make assumptions, it's like, oh, you're 13, that means you can do X, Y, and Z. You're going to get it wrong most of the time.
This is like a board that I saw. There was a joke that I saw in a university, and there was a campus map, and it said you are here, and then it also said you're supposed to be here. So it's really nice to know where you are, and it's even better to know where you want to go or where you need to be.
Absolutely.
Right. And perhaps in schools, in a social system like schools, there's so much reference groups. I think when kids see other kids doing well, perhaps they start seeing what is possible. And when they know that this is possible, they probably try to achieve that. I don't know if that's true, and it'll be nice to get your view on that. But I also wanted to ask you one really sharp question. If I had one point of data, one piece of data that I had to look at in a school, what do you think I should be looking at? And I know it's one of those questions.
Yeah. So, I mean, one data point is never enough, right? Never. And you can think of it like this. So if I have a student in front of me and as a teacher, I want to know what they know and what they can do. So where they are in their learning. I can't give them just one test. I can't just talk to them for 3 minutes. I can't just watch them read a book and know where they are, because a human is complicated. Like you need to consider a human as a whole. And that means that I need data on their reading, and I need data on their motivations, and I need data on what they want to do in life, like their aspirations. And I need to take all of that into account and have a really good, rich picture of where this student is in order to help them best.
I think my eyes are opened just hearing that aspect, that you can never have one data point only. And even if you do, that may not be representative or accurate to what's going on, especially if you're coming in to help the child, right? If the idea is to help a child, then you cannot have that one point of data. And I love that because most schools in India, at least the ones that I have seen, are always looking at that one data. How many kids got 100% pass, in 10th standard, like, which is our standard examination. And that's it. That's the only data point that they look at. And obviously they look at other data points like how many teachers came late and how many, because that directly affects payroll. But I love the fact that we need to be looking at different kinds of data across, and it has to have multiple frequencies. Right?
And that's just for one student. Like once you've scaled that up to a school, how much data you need in order to understand where your student body is, right? You need a picture for every student, but you also need an overview. And one of the things that I work on, because I've scaled up, right? Like I'm not a classroom teacher anymore. I work on large scale assessments, but we're still trying to gather as much data as we can to get a complete picture of what it is we're trying to measure. It's just how it works.
Is there a difference between data that you select or you track inside a classroom as a teacher versus data that, let's say, a principal is going to track versus a system leader? Is it a different data point, or is it just certain manipulations that you put over the data?
It's different. You have different sources of data available to you. Like you should always make the most use of all of the data you have available to you. As a classroom teacher, you're with the kids every day, and observation is a really powerful form of data. Like it's how we gather a lot of our information. And my conversations with a student, that's actually a data point. Like saying, how are you going? Like I get information. And so teachers have really rich qualitative data, right? So do I need to explain qualitative and quantitative or not?
Quantitative has a number.
Exactly, right? Okay. So quantitative is the number. And qualitative data is the human, like interactive sort of stuff and the observations. And both forms of data have huge amounts of uses and a lot of value. I don't want to debate anything about that. But as a teacher, you have a lot of qualitative information available to you because it's coming in at you all the time when you're dealing with your students. But policymakers, school principals, they have less available to them. Like school principals still have some available to them. Policymakers have almost none available to them. So their decisions have to be based on numbers, right? On the quantitative data. But they need to be assured that the quantitative data is telling the right story in the right way. But the conclusions they draw are going to be different. And it's a tension. There's tension between everything, right? But the classroom level, more qualitative with some quantitative. Policy level, more quantitative with some qualitative.
But then that brings us to this really, really difficult situation. When a teacher leaves my school, she's going away with all that qualitative information.
Absolutely.
That's a data breach.
and even handover from one year to the next. Like if you spend a year with these 30 students, you just wave goodbye at the end and then a teacher has to, often cases, they've got to start from scratch with their new class for the next year. There's not a formal, like you can't take someone's brain, right? Like how do you communicate that and what systems are in place to make sure that students are going to continue to build on what they've learned rather than having to show it again at the beginning of a year, which takes a long time, and then work out from there. Like we lose time if we don't have an efficient handover.
Which now means that teachers should think about how they can start tracking their own data, their own agency, their own self-leadership, saying that I want to track this data and then I want to give it to somebody else so that somebody else can do something with that data because everyone is in service of the child.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And I think that is very critical. I want to ask you this question about at least the Indian school context. I'm not so sure if you're aware of it, but I'm happy to tell you. We have these 4 or 6 exams throughout the year. And that's it. Right? So does that... is that a good frequency? One, it is the frequency, but is it a good frequency? Can there be tests that teachers need to be taking more? What kind of data can they be looking at there? And also in within a schooling system in India, there is so much that we pack in that reteaching doesn't even factor into the timetable. You know, you got to get it first time right. If you don't get it first time right, you are lagging behind. Any thoughts on this as a teacher, as a student yourself?
Totally. I've got so many thoughts. I mean, the second one first, right? Like reteaching, revisiting concepts, building on what's already known. You know, in my teacher training, they taught us about, you know, it's like an upward spiral, right? It's like the kites in the sky that go upwards. That you need to come back, and we know that there is research evidence that shows that spaced practice and spaced repetition is an effective way to instill things at a deep level, rather than, you know, learning it for the end of chapter test and then never using it again. You'll lose that, right? So, but I don't know a lot about the Indian context, but in general, in education systems, it's a frustration of teachers that curricula are overloaded. That there's too much expectation to teach too many things, that there's not time to do other things or you know, practice professionally or catch up remedial, like students that need, you know, a recap. And yeah, overcrowded curriculum in general is something that's struggled within a lot of systems.
So that would bring teachers to a point of breaking, right? Because every time you find something new that you want to add into the timetable, you also have to take that really difficult decision of what you want to take out
for sure
of the curriculum. So is there any more data-driven approach for me as a school teacher to be able to think of how I can take something out? Have you seen anything across countries in terms of these things are really making an impact to student learning outcomes, or even just student development versus other things?
I mean, it's the $1 million question. Like, whoever works it out will win a Nobel Prize. They'll create an education Nobel Prize just to give it to that person. One of the tricky things in education, right, is that interventions have varying levels of impact in different contexts. So, what's a good example? Okay, growth mindset, right?
Carol Dweck.
Right?
Carol, yeah.
So, growth mindset seems to improve student results in Western countries. But in a country like, I don't want to name one, but
there are countries which...
There are countries in which the education systems are very different, and actually possessing a growth mindset doesn't seem to have any sort of effect on whether you're a good student or not. And whether that's down to the curricula or the testing, like, it's a mystery. It's a genuine mystery. But the fact is that means that for my school or my classroom, I might feel that instilling in my kids a growth mindset is going to help them. And I can do that in my classroom. But I need to be open to the fact that actually maybe it won't be right for these kids, but just because of context. And one of the hardest things about education is transference and scaling. Because, what works with one classroom doesn't always work as well or doesn't always work at all in another classroom in another context.
And so it's so important for teachers to be able to think very critically to keep their own students in the center of that discussion.
Yeah.
And I think that's why there's so much talk about voice, choice, and agency in teachers, so that teachers can inform upper management about what probably is working for them.
Absolutely.
So contextualization is a very powerful teaching strategy.
I mean, it's just something that we always have to be aware of, right? When we're selecting methods, when we're selecting, topics, like what you need to be responsive to the needs of your students and their interests as well. Like, we learn better what we're interested in generally.
That's amazing. So how would you go about selecting a school for your own child? What would be the 5 things that you would ask the principal? You enter an open day and the principal says, go shoot, and he has no idea where you work.
If I'm going to be perfectly honest, I won't be the one in my family making that choice. My wife is actually a primary school teacher. She's out of the classroom as well. So I was a high school teacher. She's a primary school teacher, and she knows way more about primary schools than me. So I won't be making the decision. But we've had really long conversations about this. In Australia, where I'm from, there's a really big divide between private and public schools. public schools are often kind of perceived as like the second class option, the second choice, but actually having worked in them, the quality is very, very good. So I wouldn't have a problem sending my kid to a public school. But, you know, public schools are based on area where you live, and that influences house prices. So maybe we can't afford to live near one that we would want to send our kid to. So, yeah, I mean, it's a really tough problem as a parent to work out, you know, what's going to be best for my kids. And I think one thing as well is that I don't actually know who my kids are yet. Like my kids are little. So my eldest kid is 3. And while she is definitely showing us her personality.
Like in India, we'd know by 3 she wants to be an engineer.
Right. I think she wants to be a test developer. I think, yeah, she's definitely asking questions a lot and has a very sharp mind. But yeah, like as she grows, I think we want to see what she needs and then just try and find a school that meets her needs, as you know, and try and get a match. I think that's more important than
Absolutely
anything.
brilliant. What would you want to talk to a school? What would you want to share or say to a school principal who's sitting there in her office, you know, big table, leather seat, and she's sitting there and she's just like, where do I start? Because transforming the school is easier said than done, right? As you said, it's $1 million question. Is there any words of inspiration, or is there any starting points, or anything that you'd like to share? More from the perspective of a teacher, and more from the perspective of somebody who's led these things.
Having spoken to teachers all over the world, everyone cares about the kids. Like everyone in teaching cares about the kids, and everyone in teaching agrees that they just want to do the best for them. So it's very easy to get teachers on the same page. You know, you just need to say, what do you value in education? Oh, our kids. Everyone will agree with that. And I think it's a good point. Like, and if I was, you know, consulting a school principal, I'd be like, right, you need a plan for improvement because nothing will improve by itself. And what your plan needs to set as a vision or a mission is what's best for our kids in our school. And then you're going to have to talk to the people who know the kids. Right? So the teachers, the parents, and say, what do our kids need? And then once you know that, and I think you need some data for that as well, like where are they at academically? Because that's a need, like it's an important need. So you feed that in. So you've got your qualitative needs from observation, you've got your quantitative needs from whatever academics you've got available to you, and you say, right, this is what they need. How do we give it to them? And then that's the starting point, I think.
That's brilliant. I think what you're doing is you're giving them courage to look at teaching learning as a fulcrum to transforming a school. Because in a situation when you're in a private school and you want to impress parents, to impress upon parents to be able to be the first choice of school, right, and pay a fee, then one might tend to go and invest in things that are more visible, because parents may start taking proxy decisions as opposed to real learning decisions, because the learning and the development, the intellectual development may be less visible initially versus later. But thank you so much for that. That was really, really brilliant. I would really love to deep dive into statistics and, you know, all those beautiful graphs and all those things, but I don't think that is something that we can do today. However, I would want to ask you something. What do you think about PISA for schools now that it's going to be in India? What is your big message to schools? What is it going to help them do? And where do you think they're going to be over the next couple of years if they get committed to excellence, as you would say?
So one of the things that really sets PISA for schools apart from other similar assessments that, you know, are trying to be internationally comparable and those sorts of things, is that we have our student questionnaire at the end, which captures student voice and things about classroom climate, things about their relationship with their teacher. And so to me, who really wants to know everything I can about a child or about a cohort of children, the idea that I have academics and then some more qualitative and more holistic information about the kids in the school, I think that is a really valuable piece of data to take into a school improvement plan, because it helps you understand where your school is in a lot of ways. And then, you know, there's the international comparison, which is another way of knowing where your school is. So the thing that excites me about the project, and the reason I'd encourage as many schools as possible to pick it up, is because it's rich. and it paints a really big part of the picture. It's not the whole picture, but it's a good part of the picture.
So it's a great place to start, right?
Yeah, for sure.
As you spoke about that, the international benchmarking, it brought me to think about the idea of hyper localization and contextualization. So, just for me to understand, it's right. It's okay for me to be very contextual, yet I should be knowing where I am internationally. Is there something that you'd want to share there? Are kids the same everywhere, or can we test kids everywhere? This would be really interesting to know in terms of how testing happens.
I don't think kids are the same everywhere, right? In some ways.
So
right?
the English language says they're the same everywhere, but
no, but I mean they're not, right? Like, I spoke before about rural schools, right? When you work in a rural school, the aspirations that kids have and the needs they have for their education are different. I've taught a lot of kids, and their entire aspiration in life was to take over the family farm, and that's it. And that's fulfilling, and it's a great purpose, and that's what they want to do. And there's no point in trying to make them into anything else, because that's their purpose. But what they need is different to what kids in a city who are looking for a professional job need. So we do need to be responsive to that. In terms of international benchmarking, though, because that's drawing a line, and people think of it as drawing a line and we should all be at this level, but actually it's not that. It's just about understanding where your context sits. Like, if you're a school who's servicing a rural population, we know things about their socioeconomic status. And we know what's a realistic and useful goal for them in terms of their academic achievement. So why would we aim for the top when they don't need it? We're not meeting their need. And what else are we cutting corners on in order to prioritize that over something that would actually matter to them? So, the international benchmarking is not about ranking, because you can't have 100% of schools at the top. That's not how a ranking works. What you need to do is our school meeting the needs of our students? And it's important to know where we are, but it's also important to know, okay, schools that are similar to me, am I doing as good as them? Am I doing the best for my students? So, at the school level, we still need to have an idea of the broader landscape and of whether the school's performing as we want it to. Not, is my school really high performing? Is the school performing as I want it to, as meets the needs of the students in it.
But I love this, because this is like a compass of intentionality. Am I doing every single day what I intended to do? Am I going where I want to go? And because I was going to this place, there are other people who came along with me. Am I also being am I being of service to them? Am I taking them where they think I'm taking them to, right? I think that is really, really powerful. In the space of personal development, in the space of personal mastery, there are people who've really looked at a lot of research, and they said studying people who are successful at something. And I'm not specifically mentioning about money or financial, but generally studying people who are successful at something, and then being able to emulate their habits, their behaviors, and their structures allows you to do better. Have you seen that in schools as well? Because that is something that I'm seeing. If I know other schools also in and around my context, and they're doing some things which are getting them better results, with a certain amount of understanding, would I be able to use these structured interventions and then improve my school?
Yeah, I mean, there's totally the possibility that it'll work in your school too. And that's the thing. Like I said before, it's difficult to generalize in education, but it's important to try things, right? And it's important to say, actually, that's having a really big impact over there, and that school's not that different to my school, so maybe it'll work in mine. Let's give it a go. But you need to have a really experimental mindset when it comes to that. And you need to be aware that actually failure is always an option, right? It might not work, but we're trying it with good intentions. I love that compass of intentionality. That's awesome. We're trying to try and do better for our students, and no one's going to fault you for trying something new in order to help, right? But you need to, plan that intervention, and you need to say, right, at what point do we jump off this? At what point do we remeasure, check, and make sure it's working? And we need to be able to give ourselves the chance to say, at that point, it didn't work.
But this is beautiful because as you say this, I remember my teacher in 6th standard, when I was in 6th grade, she was teaching, I think she was teaching Science 2. We have subjects like Science 1 and Science 2. So she was teaching Science 2 and she said, I want everybody in my class to develop a scientific temper, even if you don't like science as a subject. And I can see what you're saying. She was trying to tell me to build that mindset of experimentation, that mindset of starting a project, that mindset of doing a little pilot and seeing, look for little results. It's like playing with chemicals in the, in a beaker. So I think that is brilliant. I have so many questions to ask you, but I have to ask you this question. Technology has developed so much over the past 20 years. The ability to capture information, the ability to run all kinds of simulations on it, the ability to, tend the data is huge today. How do you think schools or universities or some of the best known universities that we know have been on for 200 years? I know neither of us can actually say for a fact, but how did they think of quality, or how did they, I wonder. There's no secondary data for them.
It's a really good question.
One of those.
Yeah, you got me stumped. But we should find someone who can tell us the answer, because I'd like to know as well.
And and as we jointly discovered it, I think there probably would have been pockets of excellence, right? Some really determined person who wanted to make something happen, right? The crazy scientist or the person who really got into the subject.
Yeah.
Which now means that because of tech, we are at a higher chance of becoming that way because we have access to more information.
Yeah. That makes sense to me.
So I think if you're not using the information enough, I think we should look at data as information. And then how do we respond to information in our own context, right? And I think that is something that we should do it. But that is an idea that just came to me as we spoke. Really looking forward for the work that you're going to be doing in India. We hope, how many schools are you looking at working with in India? Do you have any number? Because India has scale.
Technically, we work with our partner in India, and they partner with the schools. So the OECD doesn't partner with the schools. But in general, in our program, we want as many schools as we can in there. We need to scale up because we can't just have open the floodgates, because we need to actually do some checks on our instruments to make sure they're functioning correctly. But yeah, from next year onwards, it should be wide open for as many schools as want it.
Which also means, because if it's a statistical tool, also the school leaders of India need to understand that by participating in this exercise, one is not merely doing something for oneself, but also building a better quality assessment over time so that other people find more reliable, the tool becomes more reliable and more scalable, or more reliable, more accurate.
Our tool's pretty modular. So we introduced a new portion of the student questionnaire this year on global competency. So about students' interactions with people from other cultures and other places, right? And so we need to gather data to check that that's working fine. And whenever we do an innovation, we need a lot of data to check that our innovation is measuring things correctly. Like, we've got to calibrate our instrument. So yeah, whenever people participate in research, participate in testing,
we make the tool better also.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
That's amazing. Final question: what is the support that a school is going to get once they do the PISA for Schools test? Is it just test and forget, or is it test and what?
Look, post-assessment's really important to our team. But because we don't have the relationships directly with schools, we've got to go through our partner. So a larger amount of the work actually falls on our partner, who needs to work out what the schools need, what are they asking for in terms of support or planning or whatever, and work out how to meet that. And we're always going to work with them. And if there's a workshop or if we can bring an external or a global perspective to what happens, absolutely we'll be there. But, we don't know the Indian context, and our local partner, we have local partners in every country that we work in. Our local partners know it. So I'm sure they're all going to plan great things, and we're going to work with them on it. But
brilliant. I learned so much from you, Nate, today, and it has been an absolute pleasure unbundling assessments and why schools in India should be looking at this.
It's been fun. Thanks.
Thank you, Nate.